Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today with us. My name is Nikita Faustin. I am a Q2, that's quarter two student here at Medill, which is the best journalism school in the world, correct? Can I get some? Woo! That's right, that's right. Thank you so much for being a part of what is undoubtedly going to be a lively discussion on college sports, what's right, what's wrong, and what does the future look like. Now, before we get to all of that, before we get to those pressing questions that we have about the NCAA, the BCS, and what does the future hold for Johnny Manziel? We all want to know that. But before we get to all that, let's just agree that the most important thing is how much and how badly is Northwestern going to beat Ohio State tomorrow? Yes, who's with me? All right. All right, that means, all right, the bonding in this room has officially begun, as has the tailgating. And without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our esteemed group of panelists, our Medill family, also known, if you keep it in this room, as the Medill Mafia, which means Mark is the godfather. To my left and to your immediate right, the moderator for today will be Willie Weinbaum. He is a producer for ESPN Enterprise Unit and a contributor to ESPN.com and frequently produces stories that appear on SportsCenter and Outside the Lines. He is a proud Medill alum who earned his bachelor's and master's degree in 1982 and 1983, respectively. Welcome. Moving on down the line, we have J.A. Adande, who is a senior writer for ESPN.com and a frequent panelist on ESPN's Around the Horn. Before joining ESPN, J.A. spent 10 years as a columnist for the Los Angeles Times. He graduated from Medill in 1992 and last year had the honor of serving as Northwestern's homecoming Grand Marshal. Thank you. Welcome. Next, we have Christine Brennan. She is a national sports columnist for USA Today and is also a commentator for ABC News, CNN, PBS, and NPR. She is the author of 7 books, including Inside Edge, which was named one of the top 100 books of all time by Sports Illustrated. Christine received her bachelor's degree from Medill in 1980 and her master's degree the following year. Welcome, Christine. Next, we have LZ Granderson, who is a senior writer and columnist for ESPN The Magazine and ESPN.com, and also writes a weekly column for CNN.com. He appears weekly on CNN Newsroom, and as if he had more time, he also does a CNN video blog and podcast. Although he is not a Medill grad, we still include him in our mafia, because he is currently an adjunct lecturer and teaching an undergraduate sports journalism class here at Medill. Welcome. And last but certainly not least, Steve Weissman is an anchor and host at ESPN, where he can be seen regularly on SportsCenter, Outside the Lines, and College Football Live. Steve also is a prominent member of ESPN's interactive tennis coverage team. He received his bachelor's degree from Medill in 2001. How about a big round of applause for the Mafia? Nobody does it better. And with that, I will kick it off to you, Willie. Have a great afternoon. Much. Thank you.
And thanks to Dean Bradham and Mark Zarefsky and everybody who put this together. It's an honor for all of us to be here on a homecoming weekend when the Wildcats play Ohio State. And to give you an idea of how things are different today than when I attended Northwestern. When I was an undergraduate, those 4 years, Northwestern's football record was 1 win, 42 losses, and 1 tie. And I'm not kidding. So we're going to open up the panel with a little joke, and that is when people used to call up the ticket office on the day of the game and say, what time does the game start? The answer was invariably, what time can you get here? That's not the way things are today. A packed Ryan Field, which used to be known as Dyke Stadium, is expected. It's a sold-out crowd, tailgate parties, national attention, My employer, ESPN, has an army of people here. The focus of the nation is on a Northwestern Ohio State game. And we're going to begin the discussion with, what do you folks think this attention means to Northwestern? And we'll start with J.A.
Well, it helps put the university on a national stage, and I think it's not so much what the attention means, but what does it do for Northwestern, and the spirit that I've seen and the energy on campus is unlike I've ever seen it here since I first got here as a prospective student in 1987, I think it was. So I see that. It was interesting because, I know the title is What's Good and What's Bad, and I kind of sense both because it was so exciting to walk around and see game day and all the auxiliary stuff that they have and all the sponsors. You see all the Home Depot sponsorship and the Coca-Cola Zero, and knowing what a valuable commodity game day is for us at ESPN. And you see how big this is, how much money is poured in, the branding opportunities, what it means for Northwestern. And again, it keeps coming back to, but what about the particulars involved? The players that are going to be out there on the field putting themselves at risk, and how much of this and all the goodwill that they're generating, all the excitement, this comes from them. This comes from their success, all the hard work that they put in, and how much do they get to benefit. So as excited as I am seeing all this and seeing the power of sports to really unify campus in ways that no other aspect of it, the journalism school is great to, see people on TV that went to Northwestern, or, you see panels, or you see, groundbreaking journalism projects. But 50,000 people aren't going to pay to watch that as they will for the football team on Saturday. So it gives me that mixed emotion and kind of the premise of this whole panel. And I think it's kind of exemplified, and it's very easy to overlook and to forget about, the people who are directly responsible for all this excitement on campus, and what is their compensation, and what direct benefits do they see from it?
I certainly agree that I don't remember anything quite like this on campus, and Willie and I overlapped for 2 years, and those were the years where we would chant Rose Bowl if we got a first down against Ohio State. And we're not kidding. I mean, it would be 28-0 in the second quarter, and we'd get a first down, and we would start chanting Rose Bowl. And you all heard from your parents or maybe your grandparents about the chant, that's all right, that's okay, you're going to work for us someday, our SATs are higher, all that kind of stuff. By the way, feel free to chant all of that at the Buckeyes tomorrow. No, I didn't. I'm from Ohio. I didn't say it. No. But Willie, I think the question, and Jay, absolutely, it's a great question, and we're on the verge of something pretty amazing on this campus, I think in so many ways. I'm honored to be on the Board of Trustees, and this construction, President Shapiro, our Dean Ham, with the athletic department in general, what Jim Phillips is doing, obviously lacrosse, 7 national titles in the last 9 years for Northwestern lacrosse, of course, NCAA titles. I can't believe I just uttered that sentence. We're winners. We're winners. We've always been winners in academics and life. I mean, I think this is already a mutual admiration society. There's going to be so much bias here. Let's just say it. But I mean, this is one of the great universities in the country. It has been. It will always be. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think for so long, when we were in school, there was that sense of halftime you'd go to the library. It was football was a study break, and to see this change, it's almost unimaginable. It's almost, I don't know, Willie, if you feel this way, it's almost like we're dreaming this. This is really happening. So my hope is, with all the major issues we have to discuss here, and Jay, you kicked us off on those, that I still think, and I really hope we are doing it the right way, with Pat Fitzgerald in the lead, what a great guy he is, and that academics still matter here, and matter greatly to you and also to the football players, lacrosse players, et cetera. And if that, in fact, is the case, this is a dream come true. And let's enjoy it as long as we can.
Well, I'm the non-purple one up here, but I will tell you, I went to Western Michigan University, who you guys recently thwarted, and when I was at Western, there were certain, Big Ten games or games against big universities that we thought we had a chance against, Like, I would go to the Michigan games, Michigan versus Western Michigan, and we'd go to drink because we knew we didn't have a chance. Well, those games against Northwestern, you kind of thought you had a chance back in the day. And this past, when the team came, they were like, "Oh, are you going to go? Your alma mater is going to hurt." And I was like, "Nah, we don't have a chance." And it was kind of weird to go, "God, we don't have a chance against Northwestern," which either means Western has gotten really bad, or Northwestern's gotten extremely good. And obviously, it's the latter. And the only drawback that I can really see, besides what's already been mentioned on stage, is that I've always admired Coach Fitz from a distance. And as soon as Lane Kiffin was escorted out, well, not even escorted, they didn't even bother driving him, his name popped up, right? And you get nervous, and you're like going, "God, I just started teaching here. I just moved to Chicago. I kind of want to see like a winning football team nearby." And all this attention, and if they beat the crap out of Ohio State, they're really going to come after Fitz. And that's the one thing that kind of crossed my mind. That could be bad for you guys, but good for another team out west. So other than what's already been said, those are the thoughts that initially crossed my mind when I think about this weekend and all the energy and excitement that I've seen thus far. Western does have a chance, and you guys might lose Fitz.
I don't think we're losing Fitz, guys. Right? He should.
Oh, lukewarm. It's all like, okay.
Whether we win, winning this game is a good thing for the university either way. But I feel like Northwestern has such a name that we all cherish and really believe in, but the rest of the country, a lot of people don't know about Northwestern, which is shocking because of all the great things that we do academically. But I live in Connecticut. When I tell people I go to Northwestern or went to Northwestern, some people are like, "Northeastern?" No, it's completely different and much better. I mean, I don't know what they're doing there, but they're not of our ilk. And then people in the South think about Northwest Louisiana, and it just doesn't have that national cachet. And so whether it's recruiting guys in Texas, and people are going to be watching game day no matter what. I mean, it's such a big entity that everybody in the country is going to have their eyes on Evanston and on Northwestern. And the fact that we're playing Ohio State takes it to another level because everyone knows the Buckeyes. So at that point, you have all the attention and all those fans, and plus the rest of the world looking at this institution and seeing everything else that we have to offer. Because, it was always a good school, but having a football program at this level really takes everything else to another level, and that more money comes in and more opportunities for not only athletes but also students in general. So I believe having game day here and having this excitement, which by the way, I mean, when I was a senior, we were co-Big Ten champs, and there were some amazing games, and we beat Michigan 54-51, and that was insane. And we go to Camp Randall, and we beat the Badgers there, and ended up getting crushed in the Alamo Bowl. But things were like this, but it wasn't to this extent. And I feel like the Rose Bowl in '95 brought people like me to know about Northwestern. And this is another really catalyst that will take the next generation of high school students to know what Northwestern is about and to come here for all the glory that it really provides.
In addition to success in football of late, the Northwestern quarterback was one of a few players who made a visual demonstration of solidarity with other college athletes. And there are some issues on the table, and that's not the only thing. There have been cases that are in the public eye, the Ed O'Bannon case, the EA Sports case. This is a time of tumult in the world of college sports. Right now, I'd like each of you to address what you think the best thing is and the worst thing is about college sports. Let's start with Steve.
I think the best thing about college sports is easy. I mean, we're all here today because of it. College sports bring people together. It serves as a linchpin for relationships to continue past your university days. I mean, look around you. I mean, you're going to be seeing these people 10 years from now at hopefully a national championship game or a Rose Bowl or another game day or something like that. So college sports in general really bring people together unlike any other. I grew up in D.C., so I'm a big Redskins fan, but Northwestern has taken the place. It's number one on my list of all favorite teams, and that's just not football. I mean, that's lacrosse. I mean, I'm a huge lacrosse fan. I wore the hat today with the 7 stars on it, and I think that everything Northwestern does and college sports-wise brings the entire community together. So college sports just makes for an environment that fosters great things. There's a lot wrong with college sports, but the worst thing, I mean, I think at this point right now that there's a big situation with the NCAA, and what we're going to do when it comes to, as Jay pointed out earlier, athletes not getting compensated for what they're providing. I mean, there's a ton of money in this venue right now, and the people that are really participating in it and where's a game without an athlete? It doesn't happen, and yet there are scholarships and there are certainly benefits that athletes are getting, but I think it's a big problem that is going to be solved sooner than later, and there's going to be sweeping changes.
My answer is basically the same thing that's right with college sports is wrong with college sports, and that's the NCAA. When the organization started, its purpose was very noble and much needed because we hadn't really figured out exactly how to handle integrating athletics with academics on the higher education level. And so I think the organization is very much needed, and I would hate to see it disbanded. But it's doing a really crappy job of recognizing where society is today. And anyone who has a conversation about whether or not student athletes should be paid and greeted with any level of levity or dismissal, I think it's such a shame because the finances in which the NCAA started with are not the finances that they are present today. And to continue to have this conversation and a set of rules in place while the president makes $1.7 million is ridiculous. So while I think the NCAA is still doing a lot of really good things, for instance, I know they've been very instrumental in helping to address homophobia in sports. They're the ones that have been getting the college coaches together on all the different levels, Division 1, 2, and 3, and making sure that they're able to have a package in place in their coaches' hands to make sure that if they have a player who's LGBT, that they're able and educated to handle the situation and that they're able to address the needs of those athletes. And I think the NCAA should be applauded for being instrumental in that. While at the same time, come on, dog, there's a lot of money out there. Let's stop pretending as if you paid students, all of a sudden now you have to cut lacrosse. The numbers don't add up to that. So let's stop pretending that it does.
How many, do we have any student athletes here in the room? Why don't you just quickly yell out your sports? Excellent. We've heard about you, and the others as well. The best thing about college sports is you. I mean, here we are in the media, and I've certainly written my share of columns about the problems, and you and I have been on enough shows, and we've all talked about all this. And by nature, as you know, as I'm sure most of you are Medill students, maybe all of you, news by definition is something that's different, right? It's not the norm. Often that can be something bad. And so the fact that we talk and write about bad things, that is exactly what news often is. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And so we have focused so much on the bad in college sports, and there's a lot there, especially in college football. Oklahoma State story, USC, on and on. You guys know, you've heard it all. The good is, and my answer of what's good, is everything else, which is way more than 90%. So like anything else, a few bad apples, maybe more than a few bad apples, I'm not a Pollyanna about where college sports are, get all the attention, and most student athletes are doing it exactly right. You're studying, you're representing your school, in this case, of course, Northwestern, beautifully. You're going to graduate on time, and you will represent this community for the next 50 or 60 years. So bravo, congratulations, we appreciate it, and we're so proud of you. And so that's the good, and it's happening on every college campus, that there's a ton of good. The bad. I think the bad is how do we solve this mess? Because we all agree that money is flowing, and it's ridiculous, right? And the NCAA was set up to defend the NCAA for just a second, that was set up to do something that it cannot do now, if you give them the best of intentions, and they do a lot of good, as you mentioned, LZ. So what do we do to solve it? And the easy, let's pay the athletes. Just a thought, I know, Willie, we're going to get into this a lot more, but just a thought. So we decide we're going to pay the football players. Well, if we're paying the football players, we have to pay the field hockey players, because there's this little law signed by Richard Nixon, June 23rd, 1972, known as Title IX. And that I've asked experts about this in the last week, and they have said absolutely, as long as you remain in the college model to pay athletes, to do the 2,000 stipend or whatever it might be. You've heard and read a lot about these issues, and they're important. And I'm not for a second trying to push them away, But if you pay the revenue, quote unquote, revenue sport athletes, you have to pay everybody else. You have to have equal representation, proportional representation in paying athletes. So that means you've got to pay every athlete. Okay, great. How many universities can start to pay every athlete, especially in these economic times? That is a huge issue, and I'll leave you with one last thought. So that you take it out of the college model, which is what some people might say, and you make it the marketplace. It sounds great, doesn't it? And I'm a realist here, and we're all realists, obviously. We're practical, we're journalists. Take it out of the college model, it's the marketplace. So now everyone can be paid any amount of money. Workers' comp has to be paid. Insurance has to be paid. I cannot imagine, I'm not for a moment saying we don't need to address these issues. Think about that, you guys. What is that going to look like? Will every college be out of business? Will we just have adjunct teams like Michigan and Northwestern, Ohio State, all of them? We'll have a football team that's just playing in the stadium and they're not going to class, and maybe that's where we're headed. But that market model is absolutely would bankrupt probably every university in the country because they couldn't pay that kind of money. So there's a thought or two.
Well, I differentiate between, I think you were talking about the great aspects of college athletics. And when Willie initially asked that question, what's good about the NCAA, I was having a hard time thinking anything. I didn't even know what LZ brought up in terms of, combating homophobia in sports. I wasn't aware of that program or their efforts at all, and the NCAA is doing a terrible job. I think they're so defensive that they're doing a terrible job of actually pointing out what good they do, because I really can't think of one. And I've wanted to do this. I wanted to go through the NCAA bylaws and see how many of these rules do you think actually benefit student athletes. How many are actually put in for their protection or for their safety or to help their enjoyment of the process. It just seems like everything is, limiting them and inhibiting them from A, capitalizing, or B, just living like a normal student. So I have a hard time coming up with what you can say that the NCAA is doing right and that's why I think it's under fire from conference commissioners. I think it's going to lose. I don't know if we're going to get in this EA Sports lawsuit, the EA Sports lawsuit brought by Ed O'Bannon. The fact that EA bailed out of that and now left the NCAA on their own, they settled for about $40 million. It's pretty indicative of which way that lawsuit is going. And one thing I learned about the NCAA, I've covered a couple of their national conventions. I think one thing we're guilty of, we think of the NCAA as this, evil conglomerate. And if you think about it, the NCAA is made up of all the member institutions. So Northwestern and Wisconsin and Purdue, that is the NCAA. It's not just this, group of people over here. Every university has an opportunity to put its input and to vote all these laws into effect. And as someone once told me at a convention, all these laws exist because the schools don't trust each other. If they believe that everyone could police themselves and would go about things the right way, you wouldn't have to enforce all these policies. So it's basically the inability. The NCAA is a failure in a lot of ways of the adults. And in that process, they're failing the students because they don't trust each other. It's their inability to believe that, left of their own devices, that everyone will behave correctly. That's why there are all these, ridiculous rules, and that, one of the student athletes that raised their hand, I couldn't give them a drink. If I couldn't separate them from the rest of the room and say, congratulations on all your lacrosse, here's a bottle of water, that would be an NCAA violation. So it just shows you how absurd it is. Why? Because the schools, the grown-ups, don't trust each other, and the kids have to pay a price.
And there is not unanimity on the issue of giving more to the athletes themselves. Many people think, well, a Northwestern education is worth $250,000, roughly, and that's the reward for representing the school on the playing field. Jim Boeheim, the coach of Syracuse, said this week that the idea of giving money to the players, paying the players, is idiotic. On the other hand, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was on TV on ESPN the other night and said what's happening now is blatant exploitation. LZ, what do you see as a way to bridge this gap that Chris touched on, where football might produce revenue, men's basketball might produce revenue, many other sports don't produce any revenue, they're supported by the others. What do you see as a way of tackling more benefits for the athletes but equality?
There's this conversation that's been going around about using the Olympic model, if you will, right? Allowing endorsements to actually be the marketplace. So the money doesn't necessarily is coming from the revenue being generated by the sport itself or allocated from the NCAA. But if Nike really thinks this football team or this football player is worth it, allow them to be able to be used as marketing tools for that, right? Endorsements, deals, and things like that. I don't know how I feel about that. I definitely think it's a conversation worth having. I joked with a student as we talked about this yesterday, was that, well, does that mean all of a sudden now we're going to start seeing representatives from, Adidas on the board of universities, aggressively kind of pushing their agenda through now because now they're able to do endorsement deals. And what does that mean? Now you're going to have an Adidas building on campus as opposed to...
They do that already?
Yeah, right.
I mean, the coaches are already getting money, and,
Right.
and Adidas has, there's different shoe companies that have entire school endorsements, so
Right.
that's already taking place.
But what I can't accept is this notion that because it's too big to tackle, then we should just leave it alone. What I can't accept is that if you take the NCAA and you take student athletes and you take what's been going on with money, right, and you look at how much money has been pumped into the NCAA, into college sports over the last 30 to 40 years, me, using my political brain, can't help but notice there's a parallel between what's happening on college campuses and what's happening in the larger industry in this country, which is wages have been stagnant the last 30 to 40 years, but profits continue to soar, and there's this ongoing conversation about, well, what's fair? We've had this conversation during presidential debates. We're having this conversation now. How can we continue to see profits soar for large corporations and the few, while those who are the backbone of those profits continue to get significantly less? So I can't accept this notion of it's too big, we can't do anything. And I'm more apt to go with this Olympic model and see how that plays out. And then if it falls to pieces, bring it back in, versus saying, well, if we paid everyone, schools would go bankrupt, so we're not going to pay anyone and continue to let the status quo exist.
I have a question about the Olympic model, though, and having covered a lot of Olympics, I'm well aware that they were paying athletes. Well, you remember this back in the 80s. There was a under the table for track and field stars, and then there were trust funds, and finally they gave up, and they just get they get paid. And so the word amateur, we should take that and throw it out the window, which is also good because it means that someone like Jackie Joyner Kersee and Carl Lewis can compete for many Olympics and grace us with their presence year after year versus doing one Olympics and then having to get jobs somewhere else. So that's the beauty of not having that amateur model. I'm all in favor of that for the Olympics. The problem is, so you sell the autographs, Johnny Manziel right away and make all the money you want, right? Well, how quickly does that get corrupted? And how quickly does a booster at Texas A&M say, hey, let's not pay Johnny Manziel $1,000 for his each signature, let's pay him $10,000. And pretty soon Johnny Manziel is getting $2 or $3 million. And LSU
You so bad about that?
Well, except what concerns me is how do you police this? And maybe you don't. Maybe it becomes the Wild West. And I, as I said, I am a realist. I understand we got real problems here. But to start to look at this, is that what we want? Do we want then LSU saying to a kid, we're going to pay you $5,000 for each autograph, and Alabama, no, we're going to pay you $7,500 for each autograph. I guess I'm in the be careful what you wish for category.
Well, here's the thing, right? Is there anything that anyone can think of? I'm sorry. Is there anything that anyone can think of that isn't at risk of being corrupted, or doesn't currently have some elements of corruption in it? If you look at something like United Way, for instance, and the ongoing conversation about how much money is being sent up to leadership and paperwork versus actually getting in the hands of the people. It started very noble, but ended up getting somewhat corrupted. Nonetheless, we think we pretty much still have a positive view of the United Way. There is nothing that I can think of, and correct, maybe maybe I'm missing something, that isn't at risk of corruption or doesn't have elements of corruption already present.
Go ahead, Steve.
I would say that's already happening now. I mean, under the table, and it's not out in public view. I mean, and back to the point about everybody being worth the same and equal and fair. Life isn't fair, and Johnny Manziel is just worth a ton more to Texas A&M than somebody on the field hockey team there. Just like a women's basketball player at Tennessee is worth a ton more to that school than a men's tennis player there. And so I don't think you can ever have somebody getting equal pay because it's just not what's being brought into that institution. So overall, I like the model where you can sell yourself. I mean, this is a capitalist society where you really do that, and if you want to succeed, you kind of make that on your own. And so I don't know if it's just selling autographs or what it would be in that instance, having Adidas, Under Armour sponsors. But that's what's going to happen at the next level. And a lot of these players, I don't know how good Johnny Manziel, just to focus on him, is going to be in the NFL. This is his time to take advantage of the spotlight and to really market himself and make money. And I'm not saying use Texas A&M, but if he wants to sell Johnny football T-shirts, I think he should be able to do that because, for the next year, that's what he's going to be. He's the Heisman Trophy winner. Take advantage of your opportunity now. I don't know. You see the Tim Tebow situation where he was amazing in college and won a Heisman and all these national titles, and now he's not in the NFL anymore. That was his time to make all that money. So I think college athletes should be able to take advantage of that. How they do it, is a discussion to be had.
My thing is, when people say, well, we're creating equity, like it's balanced now, like Western Michigan is competing on a level playing field with Alabama. So how many non-SEC schools have won BCS national championships the last 7 years? All the winners are coming from one conference as it is. So this notion that if we allow people to capitalize on their marketability, that it create this imbalance. We already have imbalance, and it's going to continue to be imbalanced under the current system. So that's the least of my concerns. I'd at least like to see people get the opportunity to be compensated fairly. And two things will, I think, keep things in place. The scholarship limits and eligibility restrictions, right? If you only have 4 years, do you want to go, will it allow you to market yourself completely if you go behind, if you go to Texas A&M this year knowing Johnny Manziel is coming back, well, that's going to diminish your opportunities, right? If you're a hot quarterback, I'm going to go somewhere else, right? So it's going to be a de facto salary cap and will create distribution simply because if your goal is marketing, or if that's one of the aspects you're taking into consideration, you have to think about how many opportunities will I have to play to get the attention, who's going to get the attention at this place. So if there's stars already existing in one school, in some ways it'll help spread it out because people are going to want to go elsewhere so they can market themselves.
Chris, Mark Emmert, the head of the NCAA himself, has talked about the possibility of stipends, talking about maybe $2,000 per athlete. What are your thoughts on the possibilities of that, and why hasn't it gone anyplace?
As you know, they actually had that going, and in fact, some schools even put it in place and gave out some scholarships back in 2011 with that as the idea that you would get this $2,000 stipend. And it was 98 men and 47 women, which of course only with the NCAA can 47 equal 98. That was 98 was all the football players and men's basketball. And for the women's side, it was all the women's basketball players, volleyball, and I may be missing one other to get up to the 47, basically the full scholarship positions. So for lacrosse, Taylor, by the way, we have here Taylor Thornton, one of the great lacrosse players of all time. And the one of the finalists for all the Women's Heisman Awards last year. Congratulations on that. And so you've got the I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The paying the athletes. So you've got 47 and 98, and of course the reality is that every school that looked at that said, well, we can't do that. We would be immediately in violation of Title IX. I think all of you know what that is. I alluded to it a few minutes ago. The law, of course, that mandates that it has to be proportional representation and benefits, equal benefits for male and female athletes. I think it's the most important law in our country over the last 41 years. I think it will reap benefits that we haven't even thought of yet in terms of women running for president. Every, on Democrat, Republican, whatever tickets we have in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and onwards, empowering girls and women the way we were for men and boys for generations. Now women are getting those opportunities, hence the female athletes here and all of the ones that you know, your sisters and your next door neighbors, all those years, soccer all the way up. And so you cannot have this be not proportional. So what happened, Willie, is that there was a period where people could chime in, when the schools could chime in, and it was roundly defeated. Not because these schools don't want to pay athletes, but they knew that they would immediately have lawsuits. There would have been a dozen lawsuits one day and a dozen the next. Any Title IX lawyer, any self-respecting advocate of women's sports would have immediately filed suit. That's why it went down to defeat. So now what they've got to do is try to figure out a way that they can pay all their athletes. And again, with the budget situations at these universities, I'm not against, I don't want to be the only naysayer on the panel here. I understand there are huge issues. But as a realist, I can't see a university in the country that can pay every single athlete that it has, male and female, $2,000. Maybe Alabama can, maybe LSU. This university can't. No way.
Which is why I say you don't have to pay them, but let them get paid. So I agree. All
So
the
who's paying-
issues
so
that you bring up.
Who's writing the check?
If a car dealership in Evanston thinks that it would help having a Northwestern athlete promote their cars, let them pay. If an agent wants to get it early in on somebody that he thinks is going to be a first-round draft pick, let the bidding war begin for his services. So
Do you advocate regulation of any kind for that?
No. Why? It should be a free market. So again, and that takes the schools off the hook, because I agree, it would be difficult. How do you pay the quarterback and not pay the punter? How do you pay someone on one team and not pay someone on a team that doesn't generate as much revenue? How do you fulfill the Title IX requirements? So you alleviate all those concerns and you let the universities off the hook. Meanwhile, who benefits? The players. That should be the only concern. What are we going to do that's going to allow the players to benefit? And
Isn't that professional sports, basically? Aren't we taking whatever amateurism there is, removing it, making this professional sports under the guise of being a university team? What do you think of that?
Well, I think the term student athlete doesn't happen at most places. You see, just because the NBA has a rule that you have to go for 1 year to college, schools that produce NBA players, they're going there for a year and they're not going to class, and then they're going to the NBA. And I think that happens in a lot of different sports. I mean, certainly non-revenue sports, students are going to get their education, and at Northwestern it's a much different situation because of the degree that you're getting here. But at other schools, just amateurism and student athlete in general, I think those are just false terms that really don't have a lot of credence anymore. Also, a lot of us are talking about paying athletes or athletes getting paid, which I'm on board with that, but a scholarship is a big deal. It is a lot of money, and they do get a lot. And the stipends, actually, I learned, are different per school. So a student athlete at Northwestern gets more money per month than a student athlete at Illinois because prices are higher in Chicago than they are in Champaign. So I think that makes a lot of sense. That said, I was down at the gym today where the athletes work out, and there's free Gatorade and power bars and all sorts of stuff. I mean, that was awesome. I would take that at my workplace. I don't get that. So I think there's a lot of things that people overlook, and whether it's clothes, whether it's food, the situation. I mean, I was on Outside the Lines one week, and it was, from Johnny Manziel one day to Oklahoma State the next day to the situation with the 3 SEC players the next day, the Yahoo Sports Report.
Steve, why don't you elaborate just briefly and explain to everybody?
So Johnny Manziel getting allegedly paid to sign autographs. Sports Illustrated put out a 5-part series on issues in the Oklahoma State athletic department. And then there was not an agent, but a intermediary from an agent that contacted or provided impermissible benefits to a few different SEC players, one of them being DJ Fluker from Alabama, which put into question, well, does Alabama get their national title revoked from the year before? On that point, by the way, when the NCAA comes in and takes a national title away 10 years later or 5 years later, that means nothing to me. I mean, they still won that title, whether they have the crystal ball or not, and you're punishing student athletes that had nothing to do with it. You're punishing coaches that had nothing to do with it. Now, if the coach is still there, punish that coach and don't, give them a series of things where they can't do it at the next institution. But you'll see coaches just fleeing a place when that school is under probation and then going and doing the next thing at another institution. So I'm really against the NCAA levying penalties against student athletes that had absolutely nothing to do with the transgressions that occurred. What was the original thing?
Something about power bars and Gatorade and stuff.
I mean, you got
I'm
you got
losing
the
control
performance
here.
Gatorade from start to finish. I mean, you got the protein shake to replenish you after.
No,
I could-
we
I
were
could have
talking
a
about
whole
the
meal of
notion of
that.
amateurism when there is a proposal on the table to allow athletes, in essence, to market their skills to outside highest bidders while they're performing and getting an education for a university.
Amateurism went out the window as soon as you started selling the TV rights for hundreds of millions of dollars. You're going to try to maintain this notion that we're doing this as an extracurricular activity when it's worth $780 million for the TV rights for the NCAA tournament. When they can sell all that airtime, when ESPN or CBS or ABC can sell the airtime. So, the notion that this is activities. This is intercollegiate activities. No, I'm sorry. It's professional sports. There's so much money to be made. And why would it be such a bad thing if the players were to get a share, whatever share that is, of the money that's out there? Because clearly there's a market for their services.
And Willie, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, okay. I was going to follow up when you were talking about the value of a college education, a college scholarship. And it, let's say here it's 50,000. Is it 65? Are you writing a check?
That's where I got that $250,000 figure for 4 years.
There you go. So 65,000. So you say, okay, that's the value for Megan, Taylor, whatever. Obviously, if they're partials and whatever the situation is with individual athletes, that's the value for Kane Coulter. That's the value for Trevor Simeon, et cetera. Right? USA Today, my colleagues at USA Today, I did not write this story, I wasn't involved, but did a kind of dug deeper and did a survey and looked at asking experts, what exactly is this all worth to a young player? In this case, they were looking at men's basketball. And they put a figure of $120,000 a year, a price tag on the value.
Their benefits or what they were receiving in value?
The value. For example, obviously, number one would be exposure, right? I mean, any of you, if any of you have ever played the violin, maybe some of you are trying to play for our school, symphony here. What would that mean to you to be on ABC television as a violinist, right, from 8 to 11 on a Saturday night? What is the value of that? Obviously, training, nutrition, and not just the power bars, the education, the coaching. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there again for the conversation, that the value, I'm not saying that, again, that we don't have issues, but
I'll
that value
is
it's certainly more than the scholarship.
But also you could say it's less than their actual value. There's also studies that some say a University of Texas football player is worth directly $171,000 a year if you were to adopt the model based on the NFL, in which players get a certain percentage of the revenue. So if you divide that by each player, they'd each be worth $171,000 in real dollars, not the perceived value. A lot of this perceived, the perceived value of a college diploma and what that projects out, the difference that you'll make. First of all, you're not receiving a diploma, you're receiving the opportunity to go to class. So in what other field is the payoff for your work, the opportunity to do more work? Because it's not like you get an education. No, you have to work for an education. That's in addition to the work that you're doing on the field. So there's that. And there's also, people say, like Jim Boeheim was saying it's ridiculous that players should pay and that they do get a value, that, there's a tangible value, $65,000 worth of a scholarship and room and board, whatever. Okay, is Jim Boeheim going to coach at Syracuse for $65,000? He would laugh at you. You think Nick Saban, if you offered him, we're going to give you some grad school courses for free and all the Gatorade you can drink, you think he's leaving Alabama for that offer?
And then, of course, if they
Gatorade.
leave for another job, the players are there and they can't just switch and resume playing for another school. There's another difference in the way the NCAA handles coaches' departures and players' departures, of course.
Not only that, Willie, but a scholarship is not for 4 years. It's a 1-year deal, and if you don't perform, maybe if you get hurt, your coach can come to you in the spring and say, you know what, we just recruited 3 of you. We don't need you anymore. And then you're out of luck. So this is a situation where you're going, imagine having, and in television we actually have this situation where you may have a 1-year deal, but you're just having back-to-back 1-year deals. That's stressful.
And going back to, you mentioned the 171,000, right? And no one's disputing that. But again, if you're going to stay within the, sound like a broken record, if you're in the college model, you can't pay the football player that much without paying the field hockey player and the lacrosse player. So the only way under the law, because obviously university is much more than its football team. This weekend maybe isn't the best scenario for me on that one.
It certainly was in our era that was the case.
Oh, thank God for women's hoops back then, right? That was one of our best teams in wrestling. But in general, I mean, a university is a tax-supported institution that people from around the state or the country are paying for. And there's so much more, and there's so many more moving pieces than just the football team. So again, take it out of the college model, put it in the marketplace model, and you'll bankrupt every university in the country. That's the problem.
That's also a good point, Christine. When I think of my tax dollars in California, as I'm paying in the UC system, some of it's going to people who don't necessarily want the education. They're being compensated. Let's say their sole purpose for going to school is they want to play in the NBA, and the NBA rules now prohibit them from going directly from high school to the NBA. So they're parked at university not to get an education. They don't plan to be there 4 years, and yet they're receiving scholarship. They're receiving my tax dollars for something that they don't even want, for something that could go to someone who really is interested in pursuing a diploma. So why should they be compensated in something that they don't necessarily want and that could be depriving someone else of that opportunity instead of just getting cash, which is all they want?
One other option that I've heard of is putting together somewhat of a trust fund with the revenue, and then when you graduate, you get a percentage of that. If you don't, you don't. So whenever that may be, and that encourages student athletes to graduate and pursue that degree. And if you leave after a year, you're obviously not going to get that. Maybe you get your $1 million bonus in the NBA. But that's something that makes sense to me, and it perpetuates more of the educational aspect of student athlete, whatever that number may be. Say it's $25,000 when you graduate. That would help. My first job out of college, I made $14,000 a year. So getting an extra 20, I don't even think I made 25 grand until my third job. And by the way, the journalism students out here, expect that. It gets better, but there's struggles in the early going. So I think that model is something that potentially could be discussed and incorporated into the situation as well, where I remember back in the 1980s, Andrew Gaze came to Seton Hall.
From Australia.
From Australia, played for a year. The Pirates go to the NCAA championship game. They lose. Gaze pieces out, goes back to Australia. Well, he literally came there just to take them or help them get to the NCAA championship game. And they asked PJ Carlesimo, the coach at the time, what he thought about that. And he said, well, if I don't get paid to graduate players. If I graduated everybody and didn't win, I'd be fired. I'm here to win games. And so that's the coaching mentality, and certainly that trickles down into the athlete mentality.
The Kentucky Wildcats have numerous one-and-done players, of course, and they're not from Australia, they're from the United States. And there's a problem with your system that you mentioned about 4 years, they have to graduate. Well, not everybody does graduate, and they've given their time. Not all those players go to the NBA either. They may have their financial struggles and might be entitled to a part of that pie. So it doesn't seem like that's a perfect system. I'm not suggesting that we're going to come up with perfection in this panel today, but we are describing some of the problems. And my guess is LZ is going to tell you another one right now.
Well, the element that I think we can't overlook, and I think we've been kind of sidestepping the issue, is that many of these individuals who show up to play the revenue sports, as you will, are coming from backgrounds that would suggest they are not in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of them. Many of these individuals happen to be minorities that are coming from poor neighborhoods that arrive already broken. Broken education system. We all know the stories about our urban education systems. It's in shambles. And not only that, you have an education system that's in shambles and is underfunded, on top of the fact that they've been told since 8 or 9 years old that they're perfect and they don't really have to study because you're going to go to the NBA or the NFL. So they arrive here, in many cases, broken. We know the stories on top of stories of players who, quote unquote, graduate from college or leave college, and they're illiterate, functionally illiterate, which means a red flag should have been happening way back when in 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade, but didn't. We're talking about you're getting an education worth $120,000, yada, yada, yada. What's really happening is that they're being exploited, not as helpless victims because they are participating in this as well. They couldn't raise their hand and say, I can't read, I don't understand, or I need to go to class, and they don't. And that's a separate conversation. But we can't go on pretending as if we aren't seeing these people have something in common, and that they tend to be minorities, they tend to come from the urban education system, and they tend not to graduate because they're putting all their chips in this one basket, and for us to pretend as if, well, you're going to at least get a chance to get an education is not being genuine. So paying them or finding a way to pay them might be the only source of income they may get from playing football ever. Not the college degree because they won't get it, and not the NFL because they may not be good enough. But this one crystal moment in time is all they have. And that is a moral conversation we need to have about this as well.
Which also brings up something that I was wondering about these last couple of days, and it kind of gets back to the original things we were talking about and the excitement that we're feeling on campus, and what a football or a basketball team's success can do for a campus. And I try to ask myself, why do I care so much about my school sports. This Northwestern's teams are the only teams I really root for. We had 2 football teams leave us in LA, and so forget the Raiders and the Rams. I hope they never win another game. I actually started rooting for the Dodgers again just because
He's a columnist. He can say things like that.
I've known Magic Johnson for a number of years, and now it's kind of cool when your friend owns the team. So I'm rooting for the
Cool when
Dodgers.
you're friends with Magic Johnson.
That's cool,
let's
too.
Be real.
I just want you to know that Northwestern beat Magic Johnson and Michigan State
His
in
last loss in college.
1979.
Oh, trust me, I know, and I make sure he knows.
I was
too.
at the game.
But I'm wondering why I care so much about, as Elsie pointed out, a lot of the players, or not a lot, but players on the team might not. First of all, they don't go through the same application process as you do. They're recruited, and they don't necessarily always have to clear the same hurdles. They don't go through the same registration process. They don't go through the same drink process, as Steve said, all the free Gatorade and Power Bars around. So they don't necessarily represent you. A lot of times they are coming from a different background. Their collegiate experience is different than yours. They've kind of gotten away from the athletic dorms in college, but for a long time, they weren't even living in the same dorms as the rest of the student body. So I don't know the answer to this because, just because they have an N on their helmets, does that create the connection? I'm wondering where this attachment comes from because I certainly feel it too, even though, these people, I'm not at school with them. And when I was at school, they didn't necessarily all come from the same place that I did. So But that is, I think, a good thing about college sports, that you do feel this bonds. But if we take a step back and say, okay, do they really represent you and your experience at Northwestern? Why do you think you care so much about these teams that don't necessarily?
It goes back to
have
that
much in
first
common?
question. What's great about college sports? That's what's great about it. That you're here, that you love it, that you're invested in it. And at this point, those athletes are also invested in you. They look up to you and everybody, here, and they're like, wow, not only can I do these athletic things, but there's a lot of students from Northwestern that go into broadcasting, go into journalism or any other field, and there's, alumni that maybe didn't play sports, but have been successful in their own right. And I mean, I look at, people I went to college with, and my roommate, my sophomore year, is now Obama's main speechwriter. And, another one of my, pledge brothers was Luke Donald, who, came to be the #1 golfer in the world. When I was in college, did I think I'd be on SportsCenter, Luke would be #1, and Cody would be Obama's right-hand speechwriter? No, but that's awesome. And in this audience, you're going to be sitting next to people and saying that same thing. I mean, that's what happens here, and I think that's what brings us all back to, wow, Northwestern, and we're here today, and tomorrow we'll be at the stadium. So it's not just football. We're here for the propensity of the journalism school here, and then tomorrow we're going to be rooting on the football team.
Well, and another thought, and I think we have obviously clearly made the case that there are issues and lots of things to deal with, and if we don't solve them, you guys are going to. So get ready. But I think there's something else to be said, and we're very lucky to have 2 fantastic journalists over here to our left. Teddy Greenstein from the Chicago Tribune. You guys read him on Northwestern, Teddy. And John.
Medill class of 1993.
That's right.
And 94.
And John U. Bacon, who's just written a great book that Northwestern's a part of, Fourth and Long, right? John U. Bacon is also here. And these 2 guys know better than probably us sitting up here, because you guys are so close to the team, to Northwestern. Let's dream for a second if Northwestern beats Ohio State tomorrow night. And maybe that's more than a dream, maybe that's a reality, but right now it's a dream for all of us in this room. You guys will remember that forever. We will remember it forever. Our forever may not be quite as long as your forever, but, right? I mean, it will be, Teddy, you may just have to retire after that.
If I can make my deadline.
Make your deadline, then retire.
No lightning delays.
That's right. John will write another book simply on Northwestern. So we're talking haves and have-nots, right? We're talking unfairness. We're talking it's bad, and it is. There's a lot of problems. My favorite sports memory, and Willie, we're about the same age, and those of us of a certain age in this room, Kathy Dunlap, my sister here, whatever, a few of us, 1980 Olympic hockey, right? The U.S. hockey team beats the Soviet Union in the Olympic Games in Lake Placid. We were doing dance marathon, and I was over at Norris, and we were watching all this on black and white TV while doing one of the first dance marathons. The greatest sports event ever. And why was it so great? Because it was so improbable. Because if they'd played 100 times, the Soviets would have won 99, but the U.S. won once. And that's all that mattered. The equivalent was Pittsburgh Steelers at that point were the Super Bowl champs. People said it would have been like a high school football team beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. So while we talk about all the issues, it is so great when the little guys win. And it is so great when the good guys win. I'm not saying Ohio State's bad. But if this were to happen, it will be one of the most momentous moments probably of your lives as sports fans. And that is pretty cool, and college sports still gives us that.
And on that note, we're going to open up for questions from the audience.
Unfortunately, we only have time for about one or two quick questions, but I believe most of the panelists are going to be staying after. But we'll take two questions. I saw one right here.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I'm in LZ's class, and my question's kind of related to that. Like you just said, Christine, like the beauty of college sports is the underdog winning. And I feel like if we start paying the players are going to flock to the schools that can offer them the most money. And for example, my dad works for NIU, and everybody knows NIU is a MAC team, and they were in a BCS Bowl last year, which was crazy. And they didn't win, but they were still there. So how do you argue that, like, the underdogs are going to be able to do that? Because I feel like if you start paying them, like, we're going to just not see that at all. And you already said, like, it's already imbalanced. SEC is a powerhouse, but how do you see that playing out?
Well, even if, let's say, Ohio State, they say, we come here, we got boosters, they're going to offer you $1 million a year. There's still only 24 scholarships a year they can offer, right? So there's more than 24 good players. So like I said, scholarship limits, eligibility limits are going to restrict that. And kind of a tangent point, but I think also if you allow them to get money, the sports will be better because you give incentive for players to stay. So let's say in basketball, instead of being one and done, if you can stay for, let's say you're only making $100,000, but if you're in college, college is $100,000. Like, it might pale in comparison to the $1 million that you could make in the NBA. But if I could stick around an extra year and even get $50,000, I remember I got paid to work on the sidelines. First Northwestern game, I'm walking in and somebody says, "Hey, do you want to help out TV Productions? Stand on the sidelines, hold this microphone. We'll give you $30." $30? So I was excited. That was like you talk about my great Northwestern sports memories. That was one of them. The time I got paid $30 to hold the microphone on the sideline, had a good dinner out of that. But if you could offer me as a student athlete $20,000 in ad revenue or whatever I could make on the side, and I get to stay in college, and part of the solution would be that the player, the NBA, could incentivize, they have a rookie scale contract. If you get drafted number 2, you get this money. But you could add to it every year. So, okay, if you stay in college 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you'll get more money. So there's a bonus, there's a financial incentive to stay, there's a financial incentive to stay both on your own and waiting for you when you get in the league. And then guess what? The product that the NCAA is putting out there is better too. Because we've seen NCAA basketball decline. Why? Because all the best players are in the pros. But if they stay 2 or 3 years and they have a financial incentive to do so, guess what? The NCAA will have a better product. The TV advertisers and sponsors will be happy because they'll be getting higher ratings. So I don't see what's to lose.
All right, we've got time, I think,
Solution
for one
for you,
more
Will.
question right here.
I think we really missed a major issue in college football, especially, because it's become all about the money. We spend a lot of time talking about the $2,000 a year that they're asking, are they worth it or not? But I think LZ was really getting to the point of college football, especially. And Oklahoma State, if you're familiar with her or not, there was a 5-part series in Sports Illustrated that stated that Oklahoma State was just churning players in and out. They weren't qualified to come. If after 1 year it looked like they weren't going to play anymore, they should find another home. So there should be more attention on really cleaning up many of these terrible sports programs. Fortunately, Northwestern is not one of them, and Oklahoma State is probably just one of many. And the NCAA has done nothing for years and years to try and correct that situation. And that's the situation that would help the players and these kids who are taken advantage of. And this $2,000 or not is just sort of almost a false issue. People are focusing on that issue and not focusing on the players. How many more Oklahoma States do you think there are? My guess is there are plenty of them. And the people who are getting exploited
How many schools are there in Division 1A?
I think the other thing, the NCAA just doesn't have the manpower to do that. I mean, we've
Why
seen.
it's got to be about men?
Person power.
Title IX.
Why you always gotta hate on me, LZ? So, I mean, because Sports Illustrated has those resources to investigate. ESPN has those resources to investigate, and the NCAA just doesn't. They don't have the investigators that these journalistic outlets do have at this point. That's why the Miami situation still hasn't been. I mean, what's going to happen there? The NCAA needs to figure its stuff out because they don't have the time and resources. First, you're at Oregon, then you're at USC, and then you're trying to focus Miami when Oklahoma State's now happening.
There are millions of dollars out there. They can give the NCAA some money that they can do the right enforcement. That's been going on for 30, 40 years.
Oh, absolutely. So I don't think it's going to change.
So this is, I think it's a false issue. Well, I think it could change.
The $2,000, I agree with you though, because what does $2,000 do in general?
Before we take another question from the audience, I want to get the response from the panel to the demonstration that Kane Coulter and the other players made recently. What your thoughts on what message was sent by that group? Let's start with you.
I think it's great. I know one of the guys who's been trying to unionize college athletes for a long time. He went to UCLA, and it started when a teammate of his got in trouble because somebody bought him some groceries. He needed food, and somebody gave him a bag of groceries, and that was an NCAA violation. So I'd love to see the awareness. I'd love to see this movement galvanize and put even more pressure on the NCAA. I would love the student athletes to one day say, okay, we're not going to play in this bowl game. We're not going to play in this NCAA tournament game, and until you do something to address these concerns that we have, including health insurance. There's a whole lot of things besides just getting money that the athletes feel is unfair. So I would love to see them get more power and to realize that they have a lot of leverage. They are the product. So if you take that into consideration, we talk about how unfair it is and how the power structure is tilted against them, but they are the product, so they have a lot more leverage than they believe.
I'm not so sure we're ever going to see the athletes all do anything in mass. To sit out a bowl game, I'm not going to hold my breath, for that. But what I think sports always does when we talk about issues in sports, and a lot of us appear on a lot of TV shows talking about issues in sports, is that athletes can take us to these conversations where we should be having these conversations. So athletes uniting and talking about issues, these young men and women, hopefully, in other sports, 18 to 22, 23 years old, that's great. And if sports takes us to another conversation, in this case college sports, where do we go from here with athletes, their opportunities, their rights? I'm all for that. The same way sports has taken us to so many issues, whether it's concussions, steroids, performance-enhancing drugs, the issue of what happened at Penn State, an incredible, valuable conversation to have in our country, the issue of women's rights, Augusta National, Title IX, et cetera. Sports always takes us there. The sports world takes us to these amazing conversations. So here's another one, and it's kind of headquartered right here with Kane Coulter and what he had on his arm, and that's great. Again, I'm not so sure it's going to lead to boycotts or a union. I just find that a little hard to believe it's all realistically, but the conversation is a great one to have.
I think about not too far from here, Loya Marymount participated in the game that changed everything. 4 African-American players starting on the team. This is before Texas Western. This is years before. 4 African-American players played in the basketball game. They beat, was it Ole Miss? Do you guys remember?
George Ireland, I believe, was the coach. We're talking about Loyola of Chicago.
Right. A team that governor had told them, you're not to play in this game because of the Jim Crow laws. And if you do, we're going to kick you out of school. And they snuck out, and they flew up and to play in that game. So I'm not so sure that we can't hope that students will do what they think they should do that is right. That was way back in the 60s, So now with social media, now with Twitter able to power a briefly lived, nonetheless a lived revolution in Iran, I'm not quite so sure that we won't be able to see athletes deciding on themselves that we are the product, we do have leverage, and let's apply it. Not for ourselves, because we probably won't be in school for the change, but for the student athletes after us. Obviously, when those students snuck out of, and I do believe it was Mississippi, when those students snuck out of Mississippi, they had no idea what was going to wait for them when they got back. They just knew they wanted to go and play in that game, that integrated game that the governor of their state said not to play in. So we have no idea what the student athletes of today or tomorrow will do or can't do, but we do know that if they wanted to, they can make great, great change.
Change doesn't happen overnight. It's something that maybe this has started. And I think, Jay made a great point that this is something that, a group of athletes realize that they are the product and they have the leverage and they can affect change. And this might be the impetus for that. I know, Pat Fitzgerald talked to Kane after and used it as a teaching moment. And
Do you want to elaborate on that?
well, I don't think he'll be doing it tomorrow. But then again, he also said if somebody's going to find a solution, it's going to be Kane. It's not going to be me. There's going to be people like Kane who are smarter than me and going to be able to figure it out. And so, this was 3 schools, I believe Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Northwestern, that had 28 total students, write APU on some part of their taping for the game. But I think athletes have been afraid in the past to do something like that. And in general, when any change happens and when anything is scary, you need those people to step up and be the leaders. And to see Kane Coulter do that, I think another athlete in another school says, well, I could do that too. And then that goes to another level and another level. And that's how any social, moral, any ethical change has ever happened in this country. And I do believe we could get to a point where athletes, unite and say, all right, we're not playing in a bowl game, because what does it do to them if they don't? Nothing. If you're a star player, you're still a star that's going to get drafted. If you're not playing in a bowl game, all right. But other than that, I think the change that could be affected from not doing that would be astronomical. All the money that would be lost. Because it comes down to money in the end, and people don't like to lose money. Why aren't athletes getting paid now? Because they've been free for so long. So why should we pay them if we can get this product for free? Well, if the athletes aren't going to pay or going to play, then something needs to change. And so, that's something that obviously leaders like Kane Coulter need to step up and do and have done, and I think can really, really change the game.
And Willie, if I can, I know we got to wrap up soon, but I just want to add that we can't forget that this construct of amateurism in sports was created by rich people to keep the working class out of the sport. That's how it started. Read the history. It wasn't this noble quest so that student athletes would be pure. It was because the rich did not want the poor to infiltrate their sports. So this is the premise that we're defending.
That's a great note to end on, because it's a perfect springboard for further discussion. It really is. You got some history today, you got some opinions today, and everybody got a very lively discussion. How about a big round of applause for our panel? Thank you.